After I zeroed, I shot a 3-shot group. Looks pretty good to me. And that's with a Mossberg Patriot Bantam Youth Model rifle. Sells for probably around $400. Pretty impressive. Well, it's always fun shooting a 243 or a 6mm. They just don't have any recoil. So you can shoot without fear of that, and you can work on your form and your technique, and it's just plain fun. But they're also effective hunting cartridges. And I think anyone who's alive today, in America at least, knows the 243 Winchester. It's just one of the most popular cartridges in the world. It's always in the top 10 of sellers, and it's an all-American cartridge. But a lot fewer of us know the 6mm Remington. And that is an interesting story in cartridge development and acceptance and rejection. I wrote a blog on this recently. You might want to check it out. It's got a lot of detail, but I think it's worth talking about. The 243 Winchester and the 6mm Remington were fierce competitors, and we're going way back to 1955 when they came out. And prior to that, there were no 24 calibers in America. There were several in Europe, but nothing over here. And what happened was, after World War II, of course, people got more free time, more money. The country was booming. People had free time, and the wildcatters were playing around with all kinds of surplus military powder, and new cases and cartridge designs were coming out. So people were really gearing up for some new and exciting cartridges. And the 24s were, of course, hot because there weren't any. You know, we had a 22 Hornet, a 220 Swift. I think the 222 Remington had come out in maybe 1950. So there weren't a lot of smaller calibers around. And I think what the average American blue-collar guy was looking for was a rifle that could do dual purpose. And back in those days, a lot of folks were still living out on the farm, and they had to put up with a lot of varmints getting the chickens and whatnot, and eating the vegetables in the garden. Woodchucks were a big problem, foxes in the hen house, all that stuff. So you usually kept a reasonably mild shooting firearm around that could reach out and touch what you needed to get rid of to save the family farm. And that's why the 22s were coming on strong, but then you had to jump up to the 25s. And at that time, there was a 257 Roberts, which was pretty good, pretty hot. And that was kind of the most popular one, I think, or the most effective one at that time for that dual purpose, because you could go deer hunting with it. It would shoot 117, even 120 grain bullet. And then another one was the 250 Savage. And I'll hold both these guys up so you can see how much smaller that one is. So obviously that one's going to be going a lot slower. But those were about it from 22, and then you jumped right up to the 27s. I don't think there were any 6.5s around. So the 270 would have been it. And then you jumped into really the 30 calibers. There really weren't very many 7s around even. 7x57 Mauser, 280 Remington wasn't around yet. 284 Winchester, nope. 7 Rem Mag, nope. 300 Win Mag, nope. There just weren't a lot of cartridges around. So you can imagine everyone was pretty excited when these 24s popped up. So Warren Page at Field & Stream was messing around with some of them, and Fred Huntington at RCBS, the reloading dies and stuff, he was making what he called the Rock Chucker. And it was based on that 257 Roberts, or the 757 Mauser, because that's what the Roberts was made from. They necked down that 757 Mauser. So he was playing around with that, and Warren Page at Field & Stream was playing around with the new 308 Winchester. That had only come out in 52, so he was necking that down and changing the shoulder slopes and things and coming up with something he called the Pooper. Strange name for a cartridge, but he thought that was pretty cool. And when Winchester and Remington found out about this stuff and decided they needed to make a 24, each one gravitated to one or the other. And that's where the competition came in. So Winchester came out with the 243 Winchester, this guy right here, based on the 308 Winchester neck down. And Remington decided to go with that 757 Mauser style neck down. That was the 244, what a cool name, Remington. 244 Remington, that should have just I mean, look at this. It's longer, a little bit longer. It has a sharper shoulder, a longer neck. It's got pretty much all the features you want in a cartridge for successful shooting, minimizing throat burnout, stabilizing that bullet in that longer neck. And it went about 100 feet per second faster than the Winchester. So here they are. They both come out the same time. American shooters are going, wow, here's a cartridge that doesn't recoil much, puts out a lot of velocity. They were both pushing around 3,000 feet per second with the heavier bullets. And that seemed like a good option for deer hunting because it would reach out a lot farther than the 30-30s and the 32 Special and the 35 Remington. In those days, the 300 Savage was really about the fastest one out there in most of the deer hunting woods. The 308 was just a little bit new yet. So that's what people gravitated toward. They were going to be able to take care of the varmints around the farm and then go deer hunting during deer season. So which one are you going to buy? Well, one would think that Remington would win out because it's 100 feet per second faster. They both fit in short actions, except the Remington fit into a Remington short action rifle, and Winchester did not have that. Of course, they had the Model 70, which was probably the most revered rifle of the day and probably still is. It's the rifleman's rifle, but it wasn't in a short action. So they had to put a block in the magazine to handle that 243 in what was essentially a 30-06 length action. No big deal. People weren't too concerned about it back in those days. But from this perspective, one would think that 7mm Remington, which was then called the 244, would have won the contest. But it didn't. The 243 took off and that Remington didn't, which is why it's now called the 6mm Remington instead of the 244. So I always think 244 sounds like an all-American cartridge, doesn't it? You got the 4440 Winchester, the 44 Colt. There were all sorts of 44 rifle cartridges back in the day. And in 1955, Remington just came out with the famous 44 Remington Magnum. Most powerful handgun cartridge in the world. Well, at that time, it probably was. So I would think with Remington and 44 all tied together, the 244 Remington cartridge would have stolen the show, yet it didn't. What happened? And this is the gist of the story. Remington saw this as primarily a varmint round. Coyotes and foxes and woodchucks and even the rodents and ground squirrels. Whereas Winchester thought this is going to be a pretty effective deer hunting cartridge. Let's work it up for a 100-grain bullet. Now you also have to remember in those days, deer bullets were 150 grains and higher. 30-30, 300, 308s. Yeah, you're looking at some pretty heavy bullets. Stepping down to 100 grain, the Roberts and that 250 Savage, they would go down to 120, 117. But man, back in those days, that was getting awfully light for deer. So deer hunters thought maybe 100 grain would work. Well, what was the problem with that 244? The twist rate in the barrels of those Remington rifles was 1 in 12. Was not fast enough to stabilize a 100-grain spire point bullet. Whereas the Winchester was put in a 1 in 10 twist barrel, and it could. Word got around fairly quickly, and I don't know, just people didn't think a 90-grain bullet was going to handle it. That's what Remington put in that 244. But for some reason, people just didn't think it was going to be adequate for deer. So they all went with the 243. And I don't know, I suppose Remington at the time figured, people will catch on. They'll start realizing that this 90-grain bullet or even an 85-grain bullet can do the job and take deer, but it just didn't seem to happen. The 243 kept gaining ground and that 244 just flattened out. So Remington obviously thought they should improve the twist rate, right? So they did. They went to 1 in 9 in their twist barrels in 1958. But who's going to notice that? You go into the store and you see a 244 and a 243, and you say, well, I've heard that 244 won't stabilize heavy bullets. In fact, you look at the ammo and you can't even find them. They got 75 grains and 90 grains. Whereas the Winchesters, you can get 75 grains, 80 grains, and 100 grains. So that's what we're going to go for. So what does Remington do? It lags along for several more years, and then it decides, 1963, we need to resurrect that thing. It's a darn good cartridge. Let's give it a new name. So they came up with the idea of naming it the 6mm Remington Magnum. Well, that fell flat because you look at that and there's no belt on it. In those days, the Magnums all had belts on it. Why would you call that a Magnum? It just didn't qualify. So they got over that idea real quick. I don't think it lasted for but a few months. And they said, drop the Magnum, let's just make it the 6mm Remington. That was so far removed from 24, 243, 244, 6mm. What the heck is that? Well, there had been a cartridge much earlier in this country called the 6mm Lee Navy. And it was rejected by the military before 1900. It only lasted for about 5 years. But Winchester was making it and some rifles for it. And they loaded that for the commercial market up into the 30s. So some people were familiar with 6mm. I think that might be what Remington was hinging on. But it didn't work either. Even though they put that 6mm in the 1-9 twist barrels and they offered 100 grain bullets and loads for it, and it was an outstanding round, it just couldn't compete against that 243. The 243 just had too much headway. So that was the story of the 24 calibers in the U.S. And, you know, those were the only two for quite a few years. It was in the early 60s, I think, that Weatherby came out with a Super 24, the 240 Weatherby. But, of course, you've got the belt on it, so you can get away with calling that one a Magnum. The problem with the Weatherbys was always they were proprietary. You could get Weatherby ammunition, and you could get it in a Weatherby rifle. And they were fairly high priced compared to the Remingtons and the Winchesters, so most people couldn't afford it and didn't pay much attention to it. Those two rode the 24 caliber train for quite a few years before anything else came along. Of course, these days we've got a fair number. We had that 243 WSSM, the Winchester Super Short Magnum. That's this guy right here. That didn't last very long. I don't know why. I know it should have, but short and stubby to the extreme. For some reason, folks just didn't take to it, even though it does shoot better than both of these. But nowadays, we've got one called the 6mm Creedmoor, and I don't even have one here. I had a couple of boxes and I couldn't find them up in the loading room, so I didn't bring one down. But think of the 6.5 Creedmoor, neck it down to 6mm, that's your baby. 6mm Creedmoor. And as you can imagine, it's set up for some long bullets and some fast twists. Most of the rifling twist in that is 7.5 inches, so that's really fast, and they will stabilize 6mm bullets, 243 bullets, up to 115 grains. That's a long bullet. Ew, I think I've got one right here. Yeah, this is a burger, and look at how long that thing is. Compare that one to, let's say, here's an 85 grain Sierra. Quite a bit longer. So what you see here is about the lightest, shortest bullets you're going to find in the 6mm. This is the 55 grain Nosler ballistic tip. Those things, you can send those out at 4,000, 4,100 feet per second. And that's a real screamer for varmints. But go all the way up to 115. So you've got quite a variety of weights there in a 24 caliber. But you've got to stabilize them. Not even the 243 with 1-10 twist is going to stabilize that 115. 100 grain spire point's about the best it's going to do. So what do you do this day and age? Well, a lot of 243s around. Everybody makes them. Almost no one chambers for that 6mm Remington. And I think it's a shame because really of the three, the Creedmoor and the Winchester and this Remington, the Remington's got the most potential. It'll drive a 100 grain bullet about 100 feet per second faster than the 243. Now the Creedmoor and the 243 are neck and neck. I mean, exactly the same. So they're going to push it about 3,000 feet per second. Both of them, because they've got almost identical powder capacity. Oh, one other thing the 6 does, it's rated for 65,000 psi's of chamber pressure peak, whereas the 243 is only 60,000. And I don't know what the Creedmoor is, but I'm guessing it's about the same because it generally gets the same velocities as that 243 with the same powder. So that's probably limited to 60,000 psi as well. But none of them are going to fail you. I mean, no deer or pronghorn or coyote I have ever shot knew the difference between a 243 or a 6mm. I haven't tried the Creedmoor yet, but I got to imagine they're not going to know that one. 3,100 feet per second with a 100 grain bullet in the 6mm Remington. Like I said, about 100 feet faster than the 243. And what else? Oh, energy. This guy will put out about 1,900 foot-pounds of energy. Same with the Creedmoor. You're going to get about 2,000 with that 100 grain bullet in the 6. You might even get 2,100 with some loads. So those are the 24s. That's kind of the story of the 20th century, the very mid 20th century 24s that started it all, and they're still quite viable. It's a great starter cartridge for young shooters, for anyone who's a little bit afraid of recoil, because there's just almost no recoil with those rifles. They're just so easy to shoot, and they're quite effective on deer-sized game. I've used them on whitetails and mule deer and pronghorn and coyote and bobcats. I haven't tried elk with them, but a lot of people out west use them for elk. Most serious elk hunters think they're too small, but if you take your shots, you use the right bullet, and you pick that behind the shoulder rib shot, you're probably going to do pretty darn well, because a lot of hunters out here swear by them and use them year after year after year. And they've been effectively used on black bear too. Figure it's a good 300-yard range gun, and I wouldn't be afraid to extend it to 400 if I had the right accurate rifle and the right bullet and knew what I was doing. After that, it starts to poop out a little bit. Lightweight bullets, they're just not going to maintain a lot of energy that far down range. But boy, they sure got the accuracy for it. And that's, of course, what's driving that Creedmoor these days too, is those high efficiency bullets of the heavier weights are going to fly pretty flat, and young shooters are using them a lot for that long-range target shooting. Clanging steel with these things is really fun. They make a solid whop out there. You can see what you've hit and hear it, and it doesn't take as much powder as some of the bigger cartridges. It's a great, efficient load to shoot for training and targets. And then if you want to go hunting with it, there it is. So if you've not used a 24 of any kind yet and you're looking to get one, these are the ones to consider. I hope you pick yourself out a good one. I know you're going to enjoy it. So until next time, this is Ron Spomer thanking you for watching, inviting you to subscribe to our channel and read my blog on this at ronspomeroutdoors.com. And we want, of course, to thank our patrons on Patreon for helping fund the making of these videos. It really helps, guys. We appreciate your support. Until next time, Ron Spomer, as usual, asking you to hunt honest and shoot straight.